Welcome to a brand new edition of the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Raymond Wu. On today's program, we'll have a heavyweight guest. By heavy, I certainly don't mean his weight. He's actually very fit physically. By heavy, I mean his stature, his experience, and knowledge of the issues in the academic and policy community on U.S.-China-Taiwan trilateral relations. He was a former deputy spokesperson for the U.S. State Department and currently a distinguished fellow and the director of the East Asian program at the Henry L. Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. And a very good friend of mine, Mr. Alan Romberg. Alan, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, Alan, we now have a new president in the White House. Can we go back to the election, the presidential election of 2008 in the U.S., by starting off with a question on what are some of the possible factors that you could identify for us that led to Mr. Obama's victory in November? I think, of course, the comments given that you are completely in your individual capacity does not reflect your institution or other affiliation.
Right, and I certainly don't speak for the Obama administration, which isn't quite yet in office. I think it's very clear that at the end of the campaign, the economy played an overwhelming role.
Yes.
It was still, I think, always destined to play a role in the election. Americans have traditionally voted
with their pocketbook.
With their pocketbooks.
Yes.
Obviously, the Iraq War played an important background role, and I think for many people was also an active consideration when they went into the polling booths. I think also, very frankly, people were very unhappy with the current administration, with the Bush administration, and it spilled over to a general desire to change parties. And so you had a lot of people who were Republicans normally, or who had switched over to be Republicans during the so-called Reagan Revolution, who essentially went back and voted for Democrats. But I also have to put in a positive thought here, which is that Mr. Obama really inspired people. There are a lot of people who, frankly, have some doubts about the level of his experience, especially in foreign policy.
His youth, yes.
But he has not only a command of issues, but a manner very charismatic, very inspiring. And indeed, I think one of the challenges for him is going to be to live up to the hope that he has generated throughout the country. So, and indeed, I would say throughout the world. I think that this is a very welcome development for both Americans and others around the world. So it was a mixture of things, issues, personality, politics.
Timing also was important at the time.
So and I think that a lot of analysts say that had Mr. McCain been the party's nominee 4 years earlier, he would have won. I don't know if that's true or not, obviously, but it was just not a contest when you came down to it this time.
I think you and I have been talking on and off, throughout last year, was the fact that, two things that clearly stood out in the 2008 presidential election in the U.S. One is, of course, gender. Now, you have major roles played by women, on both parties, throughout, from the primary season and on down to the general election. And also the other thing is race. Mr. Obama, he's first African-American to win the presidential race and the first, African-American to occupy the White House. How do you think those two issues played in the election, in the campaign? And does that signify, some significant progress, in U.S. politics?
Well, I think it reflects significant progress in American society. The gender issue, I think, was primarily seen in the primary campaign between Senator Clinton and Senator Obama, where a lot of women, particularly women of middle age, could relate very much to her. Now, she had tremendous appeal beyond that group.
Of course.
But in that group, if you want to talk about it in terms of gender per se, I think that group in particular felt very strongly. And therefore, as the campaign was winding down and Mr. Obama was winning and she was losing, and then there was the controversy about seating delegates from a couple of states, people got very emotionally involved in this because they felt it was sort of taking it away from her. I don't think that's true, but people feel what they feel. I also think that from the point of view of politics, his appointment of Senator Clinton to be Secretary of State was probably a very wise move. One never knows till anybody gets in office about anybody.
No.
But I think that has been very well received, generally speaking. Race remains an issue in the United States. There's just no question about that. But I think I feel very proud as an American in this case that the electorate really rose above what I think is still an underlying racism in many respects, and chose the person they thought could lead them the best and could
most capable,
and was the most capable. So race is not gone, but I think it was overcome in this election in important respects, and this is certainly historic in terms of the outcome.
Yeah, if you look back the election that we had in Taiwan in March of 2008. I think it was also important in the sense that President Ma Ying-jeou, being a mainlander, was able to win the election by sizable margin, and by the same angle that Mr. Obama even towards the end of the campaign, a lot of people felt that he was going to win, but the final size of the margin was actually a mild surprise for some observers in the States as well as internationally. Did you think that the significant size of margin for Mr. Obama wasn't necessarily given the mandate to carry out the changes, the policies that he wants to implement both at home and internationally?
I think in general it certainly does. Obviously, once one gets into the White House, certain realities begin to impinge. And so whether he will feel, particularly given the constraints imposed by the financial and economic crisis, that he can do everything that he said he wanted to do remains to be seen. I'm sure there will have to be cutbacks and things that require funding for at least a while. But I think that he can legitimately say, I was elected on this platform, and the people gave me this mandate to do this. Now, just as I would say President Ma Ying-jeou, Barack Obama is saying, but I'm not simply the president of those people who voted for me.
Exactly, for all people.
And so he will take into account and pay a lot of attention to the views, I think, around the country, and all presidents come into office saying, I'm going to reach across the aisle and so on, and in his case, cooperate with Republicans. But I think there is a very definite intention to do this. And I think the Republicans in this era are going to find it in their interest to cooperate with him. You're still going to have a number of very conservative Republicans who will oppose a lot of the things he wants to do, but I think you already have seen and will continue to see that a lot of Republicans will move toward the center. And that will mean they will share a lot of the basic views that he does and be willing to cooperate with him.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the global financial crisis. We're still in the middle of it. We don't know if we're bottom out yet. But the fact remains is that this is something of an unprecedented scale since the Great Depression. And you talk about the relationship between the two major parties, maybe improving, and also Mr. Obama has said that he will extend a hand of friendship to the Republicans. Would you think that this will necessarily, the end of the divided government in the U.S., would that necessarily lead to a better relationship between the different branches in the U.S., between the executive and the legislative? Would that necessarily help some of the changes that Mr. Obama has promised? For example, the issue of trade, the issue of some of the ongoing under discussion free trade agreements with other countries. Would that necessarily help his position at home?
Very hard to say, Raymond. He came out in the campaign in terms of trade, for example, saying, I'm for free trade, but...
there are qualifications.
Definitely qualifications, and he has taken what is a pretty traditional Democratic position on ensuring that there are proper provisions for labor and environment and so on. What that will actually mean in terms of policy when he's negotiating or contemplating arrangements, we'll have to see. At this point, the United States is so intertwined, the economy of the United States is so intertwined with the rest of the world, that you can't just simply indulge yourself in saying, well, I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to do that. You have to consider the considerations,
picture,
the
yes.
calculations for this. I think that having a large majority in both the Senate and the House is important to getting legislation through. But especially, well, I think one cannot assume that the Congress is going to
vote by partisan lines?
Well, I think that the Congress will insist on its prerogatives.
Okay.
That is, it is a separate and co-equal branch of government. It has distinct constitutional responsibilities, especially in terms of appropriations, international commerce, and so on. And so I think that, and internal commerce, I think that it still is going to be a matter of managing the relationship between the two branches, but it cannot, other than help him, it's got to help him that the Democrats are in charge.
So that remains to be seen as to how the interbranch relationship will evolve under President Obama.
Absolutely, and I think that it's going to take a lot of work on both sides to make sure it works well, but I also think that everybody will think it is in their interest to see that it does work
somehow.
well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, after a short break, we'll come back to the Taiwan Outlook. We're going to continue our conversation with Mr. Alan Romberg, and we're going to discuss some of the priority issues for the incoming Obama administration. I'll be back.